So 4-4 takes us to a new level here, okay? So far, what we've been doing is all of the SSS, SAS, ASA, and AAS. When we use those, what are we doing? Proving what? Triangles congruent, right? These are triangle congruence postulates. Today, we take it a step past that. Okay? What we're going to do, Andrew, put that away. What we're going to do is we're going to take that last step of our proof and go one step further with a step called Cpctc, which sounds really confusing because it's a bunch of big words all put together. It's not so confusing, okay? What Cpctc stands for, first of all, is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so it's C, P, C, T, C. Okay, now forget about the big words and think about what that's saying to us. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are also congruent. Okay, so basically what it's saying is this. If I have these two triangles, where this is ABC and this is DEF, and I have marked A is congruent to D, AB is congruent to DE, and angle B is congruent to E. Okay? Right now, I know the triangles are congruent. How do I know that? Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF by ASA. Okay? What Cpctc does is it says, okay, well, I know the triangles are congruent. Well, if the triangles are congruent, everything about them is congruent, right? Every angle congruent to every angle, every segment congruent to every segment. So if I know this, then I can say, well, then I know angle C is congruent to angle F by Cpctc because they are corresponding parts of congruent triangles that must be congruent, okay? Or I could say, I could also say like AC is congruent to DF by Cpctc. Okay, so basically now instead of proving triangles congruent, you're going to prove the triangles congruent, but you're going to go one step further and say then these parts of the triangle are congruent. Okay, but you first have to start with proving the actual triangles themselves congruent. So you're going to start seeing these types of steps as usually the last step of your proof. Devin.
Isn't it just like, you're just like basically just adding on to it now? You're just trying to prove everything instead of working into those?
You're not necessarily proving everything, but you're proving something beyond, like, usually how it works is they're going to say, prove this angle congruent to that angle. Well, the only way to do that is to use other angles and sides to prove the triangles congruent, so then we can prove those angles congruent. So yeah, it really is just one step further in your proof. So let's do a proof here. So this is example 1. And we're going to say, given that RS is congruent to UT and RT is congruent to US, they want us to prove that angle T is congruent to angle S. And you get this picture. Side note, one thing I noticed in the quiz where people made mistakes is when they didn't mark what they knew, because then they didn't see in the end, was it SSS, SAS, ASA, or AAS? So make sure on these types of problems when you're doing these proofs that you're marking what you know to be true. So right now, I know RS is congruent to UT, and I know RT is congruent to US, okay? So that's what we know. What we're trying to prove is angle S congruent to angle T, okay? I don't know anything about angle S or angle T, so I can't start there. I have to start with what do I know in this picture? Up here? Oh, no, I can't. Well, I can show you my notes in a little bit. Okay, so in this setup, what else do I know in this picture?
Reflexive.
The reflexive property. Okay, so we're going to start, step 1 is going to be all your given information. Step 2, we're going to say RU is congruent to RU, okay? Because that is the reflexive property. Okay? So now what can I say from this picture? SSS. So we can say triangle, and here's where you have to be careful because you have to name it the right way. Triangle what? Triangle RTU. Okay, so if we call it RTU, what's it going to be on the other one? USR. Okay, by SSS, because we have the sides. So now we have just said those two triangles are congruent, which means everything about them is congruent. So I can say what they asked us to prove, angle T is congruent to angle S by what? Cpctc, okay? I don't know how you can best remember Cpctc. I always say every other letter is a C, and then you have like playing time, PT, playing time, or physical therapy, PT, whatever it takes for you to remember it. But Cpctc, okay? So your proofs are not really getting that much longer. It's usually getting one step longer for the most part. Questions on that? Okay. One more proof and we're done. So this is example 2. I'm going to give you that RS is congruent to VS. RT is congruent to VU. Angle R and angle V are right angles. We're going to prove that angle T is congruent to angle U. And this is our picture. Sorry, that's not T. Go away. That's V. This is U. This is T. What should I do first before the given? Mark it up, right? Label what you know. So RS congruent to VS. We're going to mark that. RT congruent to VU. Mark that. And angle R is a right angle, and angle V is a right angle. Okay. So look at what they're asking us to prove. They're asking us to prove this angle down here congruent to this angle down here. But we don't know that they're congruent, right? We don't know anything about them. So your first step is always what? The given. So we're going to take all this information and plop it right here. Okay. Do I know the triangles are congruent right now?
Yes.
There's one thing you got to say first. What do you have to say? The right angles are congruent. So we have to say angle R is congruent to angle V because all right angles are congruent. Okay, so then mark that. This congruent to that. Now what do you see in your picture? Look at your markings. What is it showing you? Side angle, side, right? SAS. So we're going to say, if I say triangle TRS, what triangle has to be the second one? UVS. You got to match up the corresponding parts. Okay, the reason being it's side angle, side. Okay, so I know the triangles are congruent. What can I say next? What'd they ask us to prove? The angles, right? Angle T is congruent to angle U by Cpctc, right? So once you've given this step, SAS, typically your next step is Cpctc. One thing to note, you will never do this. You will never do Cpctc and then one of the 3-letter postulates. That cannot happen. You cannot use Cpctc unless you've already used SSS, SAS, ASA, or AAS. And typically, it comes one right after the other. Okay, not every single time, but majority of the time, I cannot think of a time when it wouldn't actually. It will come one right after the other. Okay? Questions on that? Do you get what Cpctc is? What does it stand for? Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Cpctc. Good? Okay. So tomorrow I am teaching you a new lesson.